Hey, Lockie, welcome to the Light Path podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. It's pretty surreal being on the other side of the couch, I guess you could say, being asked the questions instead of asking the questions. So yeah, it's a nice bit of a change.
Yeah, exactly. So you would have heard in the intro that Lockie has his own podcast. And I like turning the tables. I like being on the other side, at the other side sometimes, but people may not have necessarily heard of you. I think that I don't want to say you're up and coming, but I think, you're kind of gaining momentum at the moment. And so I wanted to bring you on because I think you're going to give us a really nice rounded and grounded perspective of men's mental health and what men are going through, and more importantly, what the divine masculine actually means to you guys, and then what the
Mm.
divine feminine means to us, and how it is that we can actually have these polar opposites work with each other instead of maybe how it's traditionally been experienced or programmed within us to work against each other. So before we dive in, I'd love for you just to tell us a bit about yourself, what you do, where you're at, and how you got to this point where you do have a huge advocacy for men's, especially mental health.
Yeah, so I guess it all started, when I was growing up. I guess I was a bit of a rough kid in some of the ways, and I sort of faced my own adversity quite early on, probably around from 15 up until, well, I'm 22 now. So there was about a stretch of about 7 years where, there was some really, really dark times. And I've had, mental health is really, really important to me, and I've had a couple of people pass away due to suicide. One being primarily men. So yeah, one of my really good mates when I was in grade 10, he unfortunately committed suicide. So I think that started early on for me when I was exposed to men's mental health and the stigma. And it's like, he was the most happy, most charming, most, out there, most bubbly, person. You would never think that he would go home and unfortunately be found by, with a noose around his neck, right? So then it sort of just sparked up the conversation and the question within my own self. It's like, why are men, especially, men at that age, taking their life? They don't feel like they have a voice or a purpose or anything, or even a bit of a shoulder to lean on, to cry on, or even just to be heard. So I guess, yeah, from then on, I was always exposed to that from that point on, but it was a huge turning point in my journey, in terms of navigating where I wanted to go and, seeing the conversation flow within other people, and especially throughout my cohort for the remaining of my school years. Further down the line, I had a female friend. She actually passed away from an overdose as well. And I think that sort of all intertwines as well. It's like there's mental health, but there's also mental illness. And I think addiction can come from mental illness as well. So that's been really something what, perked at my ears. And it's like people suffer in so many other ways than we can even comprehend. It's not just, I'm feeling left out, or feeling, not really included and stuff. It's like I'm running away from this problem, which, I turned to drugs. And, I had my own experience with drugs, and it was, I was running away from the pain I was creating within my own self. And those they came along some really dark times. And I think, over the years, especially in the past 2 or so years, as my advocacy has really, launched off. And, I just wake up every day trying to, just remind men and remind people that it is okay to have a bit of adversity or a downfall in their own mental health. And, being, I guess, being a bit of a light to, just remind ourselves that it is okay to not be okay. And I think by me creating the conversation throughout my own podcast, and even with my own relationships and friendships and connections that I come across with, I think I've already seen such an impact being had, and it really lifts me up. Seeing people come to me and, like, even just by the conversations I have with, even a stranger. I'm a very big believer in, one smile, one comment, one compliment can really change someone's life and their outlook on, where they are in their own journey. So I think there's been a lot of, it's all sort of compounded up into this point. And, I'm at a point in my life now where, I have so many great things going for me. And, I struggle with myself sometimes, as we all do as a human, right? So I think by allowing myself to sit in my own shit sometimes really allows me to feel all the feelings. And, just by expressing what I've learned from this or that, I think it can all have a bit of an impact on anyone else. And I think, yeah, just showing up and becoming, who I want to be, and, just becoming the best version of myself by, uplifting each other. I think the conversation around mental health is slowly starting to come together, and it's slowly starting, to change their lives and to change the statistics. And I think that's my biggest mission in life right now, is just to, show up every day and to change the stats.
Well, let's talk about the statistics. I mean, the reason specifically I wanted to speak to you is because you are so young. And what I remember about being 17, just a few years before you were 17, but a good roughly like 23 years before, I remember there was a book that came out. I'm pretty sure it was called Leaving Early, and it was about the youth suicide rate in Australia. That was back in the 90s, and we're still here. And
Yeah.
and so the fact that maybe we started having those conversations when people of my age were your age, but now you guys are still having the same conversations and leading it, you know, the more we talk, obviously, the better we're going to get at understanding it and maybe finding ways to prevent it. But of roughly the 3,000 people in Australia that do commit suicide a year, 75% of them are men. And this stat hasn't shifted much since I was in my youth. But I think that what's really interesting, and I know you distinguish between mental illness and mental health. So that would be interesting for you to expand on. But even that, like in terms of recorded cases of mental health, 45% of women will be diagnosed with some type of mental health in their lifetime, and 43% of men. Yet the majority of the men are the ones really suffering, perhaps with nowhere to go with it, and making the ultimate sacrifice of themselves. So the fact that these stats haven't changed scares me as someone, 20 years on from you. How do you guys talk about it in your, field of 20-year-old chat?
Well, I think I want to go back to what you just said there. It's majority of the men. Yeah, more females. I guess it's similar statistics in terms of being diagnosed with something, but it's more males who are committing suicide. And I think it comes back to the old age stigma, what's been, transcended down from the older generations. If you were to have a conversation about mental health in the 60s, 70s, God forbid, you would have just been called, you're a bitch, step up, you're a man, come on. And I think that's been ingrained in a lot of men because a lot of our grandfathers still have that mentality, right? I know my grandfather does, and I've even seen it, but I'm grateful that I've been able to notice it. And so I think with men, there's always this stigma around, and there's even some men around my age now who still believe that, especially in the trade industry too. That's a whole different conversation. But I feel like, even in my experience, there's always some men out there who still feel like they can't talk because of the stigma, or you have to be this alpha, this macho man. I can't talk. I gotta show up and step up, and that's not the case at all. But I guess in the terms of my own conversations with 20-year-olds in the 20s or early 20s, I should say, I think because we have a lot more compassion for each other now, and especially in my group, I know I make it very known to have the conversation and to reach out. And I invite people in all the time to share conversation about their own, emotional well-being, their physical well-being, because I think it all twines in together. There's so many different facets that we can implement into our own life that can have a downstream positive effect on our overall mental health. And so I think by getting out there, by training, exercise, whatever it is, and even in the midst of exercise, just opening up the conversation, I think a conversation can have a really good output if it's in the right frequency and in the right, environment. So I think by getting out and just getting out into the community, having the conversation when we're outdoors, the frequencies are elevated, everyone's elevated, and even just allowing ourselves to be vulnerable too, and to make it known that it is okay to, just to have a chat about your thoughts and emotions, and, the positive things that come out on the other side of that. It's literally changing lives.
For sure. I think one of the big things that piqued my interest in you, or something I may have realized when I came across you, was that the Aware and Awake podcast that you host is actually just about sharing stories. And it made me think, wait a minute, women share stories. This is what we do. Like, we just talk to each other constantly. And it's like, when your partner comes home and he just casually mentions like, oh, so-and-so broke up. And we're like, what? What do you mean? When? And we want all the details. And he's just like, what? Like, it has no details. It was just like a fact. And we're into the story. We're into the backstory. We're into the details. And so when I saw your podcast, I'm like, oh, look at this. This is actually men sharing stories. And I think through storytelling and sharing, that is why perhaps one aspect women have maybe been able to find more understanding, more acceptance, and more support. Whereas with men, like I haven't seen too many people do that. I've seen people lecture at men. I've seen people try to motivate men. I've seen people go to retreats and like pour it all out in the bush somewhere as men. All of that is great. But to share stories, I think is really powerful. How are you finding that as the modality through which to connect?
I think it's such a strong, foundation in the means of connection and creating positive changes by storytelling, because the lessons we learn in the face of adversity and our own challenges, when you tell people your advice stems down from your own experiences, right? So I think by men going through their own sort of challenges and adversity, by hearing other men speak up about their stories and what they've learned, I just pray that the men who are listening to my podcast, they take those golden nuggets from all the other men being vulnerable, telling their story, which is going to have a positive effect in their own life, in their own mental health, but also with their relationships with other people. And, coming back to relationship with ourselves too, it all comes back to what goes on upstairs. And, just by hearing the stories, I think it's crucial, I guess, in the way if you want to curve the statistics and make an impact. I think by having shared experiences and, just by expressing what we have learned throughout our face of adversity, it is literally changing lives and it's impacting the community in the way that it needs to be, I feel like.
Do you have any standout stories that you've been a part of on your podcast that you want to share?
Yeah, so one of my good buddies, he actually did my first ever episode with me, Blair, and he's such a beautiful man, and he was telling us about how he found his dad, who had committed suicide. He walked into his shed, and unfortunately, his dad was present there. And you know, Blair's same age as me, 22, and he's heard the story, and he's been telling the story about his father. And Blair's had his own downfalls with his own mental health, and I think just by even within my own self hearing that, I couldn't imagine seeing my father, hanging himself in front of me. And I think that really shared a lot of, relatability with a lot of men out there, because men do see these stuff, but they just don't talk about it, right? And I think by the inspiration of Blair opening up about his story, it trickled down to other men who, I had feedback from, and they've had the same similar experience. And I think, that story alone is so sad, but at the same time, it's could be crucial to help someone else's journey. So I think that first episode for me, and it's like, yeah, it was a personal connection because I knew my guest really well. But I think just to have him there, sitting there and being vulnerable to their own self, it had a great experience without other people. But I've had other guests, the other standouts, one with Dylan Dixon. That was one of my first ever videos that sort of blew up. And he was talking about his experience with, being a bit of a gangster back in the day. And, he used to run drugs, he was pretty much Pablo. But, he's had guns down his throat. He's been kidnapped. He's kidnapped people and he's been in and out of jail. And yeah, that was an inspiring story to hear. It's like, we can all have mental health as well. But I think hearing like stories about how people have overcome that type of lifestyle as well in their own time, that's inspiring in its own way as well.
Yeah, for sure. Just through your anecdotal commentary, or what do you see as the main issues for men at this point in time? Like, what are you guys really struggling with?
Comparison is probably one of the biggest things that I come across.
Okay.
I say that and people, have your reaction. They sort of like, oh, really? Yeah, I think with a lot of men, along with the stigma of, you're a bitch if you speak out, or, you can't reach out because of X, Y, Z, you have to be this macho man, the alpha mentality, etc. A lot of men are, really that we compare ourselves to other men out there. I think that's another big thing as well, especially on the Instagram game. And, I live on the Gold Coast here and I see it all the time. You go down to
I
Burleigh
mean,
Heads.
surely people on the Gold Coast don't compete with each other about the quality of their life. Surely, no,
Yeah,
come
you
on,
wouldn't think so. Hey, no,
no.
come on. That's bloody nonsense. No, but yeah, I think one of the biggest things that men are facing right now is, as well as the stigma, is comparing ourselves to what that other man looks like. How many abs does he have? The girl he's with. I think a lot of men, I hate to say it, but we're all insecure at some points. And I
Mm.
think that insecurity is bred from the comparison game, what is, trending at the moment.
I think that's something that girls go through as well, for sure. But I think we've taken it one step further, and I would say same but different. For us, it's worthiness.
Mm,
Like, am I worthy enough to find a great boyfriend, or am I worthy enough for this job? And so you guys are comparing against each other, but I think maybe girls are still conditioned to compare through the male gaze of worthiness.
yeah, yeah. And
Hopefully changing, but
yeah, and on that, I just want to give you grace, and I can understand that because you know there is a lot of trash men out there who aren't doing their work, who are projecting out their own insecurities, and who are genuinely trying to unfortunately hurt people. I think I've seen that in my experience too, and that's something what I'm trying to bring to light in a bit of a lighter scale is men, we have to go inward. We have, of course, everyone has their own insecurities, but if we want to fix that, if we want to heal our childhood traumas or the traumas from our past relationships, we have to go inward. We have to do the work on ourselves to be able to have a positive effect on when a woman comes into our life. And so I can definitely understand that because I've seen it in my own two eyes. I've seen, men project their own insecurities and what leads to women feeling like they aren't worthy enough.
mm.
So yeah, that's something that even I can understand from your point of view as well.
What do you think along that line men fear the most? I know, just a casual morning conversation that we're having.
No, I love it. I haven't even been asked that, which is really thought provoking, and I love the depth of it. I think we fear as well not to be good enough as well. Um, I know in my experience that's been something what I have experienced as well, and I know a lot of other men who are even a lot older than me who feel like that as well. No matter how hard we do show up and how hard we do try, it's like nice guys always finish last, right? Um,
Oh my God, that I tell you what, if women had one prayer, that it'd be for boys to get over that because it's
mm,
so not true.
mm. Yeah, I guess.
It might feel true for you guys, for sure.
Yeah, sometimes there's been at some points where there's been even in my experience in the relationships that I've had, there's been some trauma there what I've overcome, thankfully. But yeah, I think it did come back to me not feeling worthy as well. Whether it be having a relationship, fail due to cheating or whatnot or something like that. But yeah, a lot of men, I genuinely think it also relates back to we sometimes don't feel worthy enough as well. And we have a fear of being, let down. Which I know is something what isn't spoken about as well. But the conversations I've had is definitely prominent there as well. And, that's why it is coming back inward to be able to feel the worthiness within our own self,
Who are you
being our
most
own friend.
so who are you most afraid? Like we're talking anecdotally here in terms because you have had a lot of conversations with a lot of men. So that's like
Mm,
we're just these are not absolutes for those that are listening, but who do you guys most fear being let down by?
women.
Okay. And
Yeah.
is that
Um,
being left by by us or
I wouldn't
betrayed?
say it's being led. Yeah, portrayed. I think a lot of men, we do experience it as well. We do experience being, being cheated on or sort of being led on. And yeah, I think as a whole, we do fear being let down as well, for sure.
In comparison, and this is anecdotally, I think women fear safety, obviously. It's a huge problem in
Mm,
this country, in a
mm,
lot of places. But do you know what I think we also fear the most is that we won't be able to live out our womanhood in the way we choose. Whether it's if we want to be a mum, will we find a supportive partner to help us do that? Or will we have to do it on our own? Will I find a partner that really champions me in my successes and careers, who's going to actually like be the backbone for me? And
mm,
and I think we're in this really funny place with the masculine feminine dynamic where women are told go out, have it all, be it all, do it all. Like we're so pumped up, like maybe a bit too pumped up at this point. It was necessary at the time, but now I personally think it's maybe too much to the point where I see a lot of social commentary around, especially men. So, like you in 20 years' time, who may have been aware of this stuff but didn't do the work. And now we're like, women are like, I'm not doing the work for you. You're on your own,
Mm.
like, do it. And I hate that because, and I'm not saying that women should go out there and do the work for men at all, but I
No
think that
way.
we should champion them in doing the work. But I think there's this bitterness and there's this maybe a little slight arrogance. God, people are going to come for me for this, but slight arrogance in women in terms of like, we can have it all, we can do it all, catch up, keep up, keep up. Not maybe recognizing that because of all the things that you discussed at the beginning, you guys are maybe 20 years behind. And so to hold grace for that, how would men like to be held by us? Not fixed by us, but held by us in their journey.
I think, like you said before, just giving the grace that, and recognizing that men are doing the work. And, I'm going to back that up and say there are a lot of men who don't do the work at all. And that is a result of, I
Same
guess, the
same with women
unfortunate.
though. Same with women. Like lots,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah, absolutely. Nail on the head there for sure. Yeah, I think, men, we want to be appreciated and, encouraged to do the work because, like you said, the bitterness. I can, if you were to ask any men on this planet, there we do experience that on a daily basis. I'm not going to say that's the whole, minority of females, but there definitely is. I'm going to say people are going to come at me probably for this, but 90% of women are bitter towards men,
Yeah.
and but I'm going to back that and say that's a byproduct of the unfortunate
Yeah.
mis misconduct of men who have done the bad things. And going back to what you were saying about the safety, I absolutely can understand that. There's a lot of really good men in the world, but there's also some really trash men. And unfortunately, those trash men is leading to, you guys having the unfortunate, uncertainty of just being safe outside.
Mm.
Um, but I think to go back to your
But
question,
actually, more
definitely,
we're more unsafe in our homes, unfortunately.
yeah. And I've
So
been seeing that.
the choice of partner for us is really dicey too, because
Ooh, yeah.
we're actually more unsafe with our partners statistically
Mhm.
than we are
Yeah.
walking,
No.
and we're scared of walking down the street.
Yeah, I get that. And that's just like, another representation of men not doing the work, right?
Mm.
Men who aren't, that's another, reflection of just projecting their own insecurities. Whether it be coming down to a controlling or toxic relationship, I think I can absolutely understand where you're coming from.
So how do we hold space for it, um, an expectation for it in a nourishing way? Because we also need to get our needs met as well. Like how would you do that? Just like, is it open, honest communication? Is it women actually getting better at male vulnerability and holding that?
I'm going to say yes and yes. Um, I've had conversations with men who feel like it's a sign of weakness to cry in front of a girlfriend or cry in front of your wife or even just a woman, right? In my own personal experience, I probably wouldn't let that come into my life because I am very vulnerable and I can be really open with my emotions, but I can also be very masculine in some really healthy ways in terms of, yeah, just I guess leading by example or, knowing how to treat a woman or all this or that. But I think just allowing men holding space for men in terms of vulnerability and to encourage vulnerability as well. And to back up the encouragement of vulnerability with like, showing the strength that you have just, shown by showing up as well and providing that vulnerability.
Yeah, for sure. I'm gonna really kick myself here because the name of your guest has completely slipped my mind, but you recently were having an amazing conversation about divine masculine energy with
Ben
someone.
Lowe. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Should have researched that better before we started.
You're totally fine.
But I love that conversation because it's the first time I'd heard guys like really dissect it, but
Mm,
more importantly, be led by it. I think women
mm.
are led by the idea of the divine feminine. We want to be in our feminine. We want to have all these things. And so we're led and inspired by that. But for those that haven't, obviously, lots of people wouldn't have listened to that episode, but I do encourage you to go and find it. Do you remember what the episode is called?
Episode 11, I believe.
Oh, geez, you know the number. You're good.
I'm fairly sure it's episode 11. Yeah, yeah. But it's
I'll
Ben
pop,
Lowe.
I'll
It has
pop
a
it
good
in.
one. Yeah.
Okay, I'll pop it in the show notes. But can you talk us through that conversation and the standout kind of ideas for you on this, the defining of the divine masculine? What does it actually really mean for you guys? No point us defining it because we'll just
I,
say we'll define it in terms of what we want it to be in terms of
yeah,
what it actually is.
sure. Yeah, so I think in terms of divine masculine, I think, my idea of masculinity and, being strong in your values, your morals, holding yourself to a higher regard in terms of being able to show up and support, if we're talking in a relationship, show up and support your woman in every other way that you can even think of, and allowing your woman to sit in their femininity in the most ripest and most strongest sense. Like, example, not letting her carry a bag or any of that stuff. Just allow her just to be really in touch with her femininity, because at the end of the day, being a man is to show up for those around you as well, but also in a way that is positive. And I think to be able to hold space and be a pillar of strength and comfort and, love, I think that's the ultimate just expression of a divine masculine, but also allowing yourself to go inward and to sit with your own shit sometimes, and to sit with your own emotions and thoughts, and allow yourself to express without, having the need to feel like you're being, I guess, made weak. I think in a nutshell, that would be divine masculine for sure, is, yeah, allowing your feminine to just sit in that in the most strongest sense possible.
How would you
Does
define?
that make sense?
Yeah, it does. But I'm so interested in how you define divine feminine.
Divine feminine.
And this is so putting you on the spot, so I'm really sorry. It's just
No,
it's just
hit me with
interesting to
anything.
think out loud with these ideas.
I think a divine feminine is, I guess, almost in the same way, but allowing your femininity to shine and to be that comfort as well when a man is, expressing his emotions, allowing and hearing him, and just holding him in that space, and, almost creating a deeper sense of connection whilst your man is expressing, and being vulnerable. I think that's, in short, divine masculine, feminine, sorry, is, yeah, showing up and be able to hold utmost respect and space for a man when he is in a time of need.
Lots of mamas listen to this podcast.
Mm-hmm.
What would you have as a message for them who are raising young men who might only be teeny tiny now and full of emotion and full of spunk and all those things, but and are watching it as I am as the teenage years come in and they turn to quite interesting creatures. One word answers monotone boys. What would
Mm-hmm.
you say to us? Because we're the first feminine in their lives and we want them to become awakened, strong men. What tips could you give for us?
I think it's to honestly practice that divine femininity. And, as men, as young men, I should say, going through puberty, especially, I think that's where a lot of the stigma is projected onto young men, is when they're being exposed to, whether it be social media or even older generations of men throughout their teachers or even, parents, etc. Um, letting this young man know that it is okay to have all these feelings and emotions, but also to not allow yourself to sit in it for too long, because that's when unfortunately, I feel like depression and stuff can creep in, and that's when you're going to be looking at, possible, suicidal allegations. And just by practicing that on a daily basis and ingraining within your own son that, it is so strong and it's so courageous to reach out in a time of need, and to back that is going to come with so much self-resilience and also so much self-growth that, they're going to be able to lead by example because they have had that trait instilled with them from a young age. I think what created the stigma in the first place was the constant projection from boy to young man that you can't speak up, or you can't allow yourself to show emotions. And, when we can't show emotions, we get built up anger. It's like, a pressure cooker. And that's why you see a lot of men flip, especially, 35 plus in that, age bracket, because they weren't allowed and they weren't shown that it is okay to be expressive of their own, in a dialogue.
Yeah, I mean, I think the real work is for the fathers out there in a lot of ways because,
Mm-hmm.
men are going to look to men to see how to be and how to move through this world. And as their mums, we want to be that soft place for them to land.
Yeah,
Um,
for sure.
so
That
hopefully,
that divine feminine, right? That soft place, that soft pillow you can come to, right?
yeah, exactly. You're doing such important work.
Thank
And
you. I appreciate that.
I think even the work is vulnerable itself. So you
Mm,
clearly you have built that resilience to be able to hold that vulnerability within yourself. And I really think anyone who's listening to this, who knows young men, even teenagers, get on to Lockie's podcast and especially your socials. I love your socials. Walking down the beach, chatting away, big smile on your
mm,
face. And it
yeah.
lights me up when I see it. And so I'm going to put everything down below, share it with those that just need to come into awareness that there's a different way and there's a more
Mm,
evolved way. And
mm.
so I just want to not just thank you for your time today, but thank you for the work that you're doing because I'm sure it's making a far bigger impact than you could ever begin to realize practically for yourself.
Thank you so much. That means a lot to me. That's such a beautiful compliment. Thank you.